So here we are in Paso Robles. We've been saying Paso Robles, and it's really interesting because people refer to it either way. But we have learned so much about the terrain, about the climate, and in certain hills and mountains in the distance we can see Big Sur. Pretty cool. Now let's look down, and this particular winery, Everly, is 40 years old, and they were really the leaders of this movement. In fact, they have a cave. There's now about 5 caves in Paso Robles, and which is pretty exciting. And there's some really interesting wine being made. Last night, I wish I had the video of the Magnum they opened after all our wines at dinner that were just so beautiful and finished so well to go with food. So we're going to be bringing this to you and lots more. And I can hear the call for Gary to come over. So this is pretty exciting. Later on today, we're going to be going over to the other side of Paso Robles, and it's going to be interesting to see how the terrain and how they're growing the grapes differs.
Most vinifera vines are pretty good. They're self-preservating, but Chenin Blanc, and if you look at where it grows most successfully, like the Loire Valley and places where there's a lot of moisture, where you get your best Chenin Blanc.
There's only about 3 to 2% of Chardonnay left in Paso Robles, and in the 80s it must have been, what percent would you say was Chardonnay in Paso?
Probably close to 15.
So we're about 2-3%. So I can safely say we make one of the best Chardonnays around. But so this is the 17 Viognier. This is half stainless steel fermented, half barrel fermented. This is picked between 2 separate times, one at 23 and a half bricks, and the other time is the last one is at 24 and a half bricks. So with the first pick, I'm trying to get some more of those green characters, and with the later pick, I'm starting to get more of those nectar kind of stone fruit kind of characters. And when you blend the two together, it makes a pretty complex Viognier. So I don't put any of the whites through malolactic. I like to preserve all the natural acidity in the grape all the way to bottle. So we don't really have to acidulate most of our whites. So it's very a natural process most of the time. We do add yeast. That is the only process that I would say is unnatural, but most people add yeast anyways. So no new oak on this wine. 50% stainless, 50% older French oak.
I was just really moved by the whole place and the feeling. As you see, it's a beautiful place, but it's also a very special place. I'm actually getting emotional talking about it. There's a lot of, we'll go into that later, but I came to the tasting room, mouth wide open, kind of agape, and did not have an appointment. I was not a buyer. And as you know, as a media person or a buyer, you have a different kind of visit and experience. I was just kind of a girl on a Friday, and I came in and said, I think I'm just going to taste some wines. And I meant to stay here 15 minutes, and I stayed for 3 hours because I got to meet George and then Daniel. It was during harvest. And I drove home from that trip, and when we go home from these trips and it was like 3 days of food and wine and fun and fellowship, I came home. I have 4 children at home, and my husband's working his computer, and I used to always say like, oh, it was really nice, honey, good food, good wine, nice people, because you don't kind of want to rub it in. But this trip, I couldn't help myself. I was like, oh my gosh, and the Paso, and this passion, and these winemakers, and field blends, and like, I said, the creativity there is overwhelming to me. And he turned to me and he said, are you okay, honey? And I said, I'm actually better than I have been in a really long time. And so that's what Paso really did for me, was it really reconnected me to the wine business. When I came here for the first time, I remembered and I saw and I felt and I touched and I tasted what real passion and innovation is, and that's what's living here very strongly in a big way in Paso.
My family's background is very interesting. We're actually originally from Lebanon. So my father and my uncle are 2 of 4 children, the 2 youngest, and they were born in Beirut in Lebanon. And when my father was about 8 years old, my uncle was about 12, and my grandparents tried to stay in Lebanon for a little bit, but just wasn't possible. So they relocated to France and lived in Paris, got a formal education there, but they would spend summers in Cannes and Saint-Tropez, and that's really where my father's first memory of and love of wine was. My grandfather was a very suit and tie type of guy, very entrepreneurial, but the only time he'd really get down and dirty is when he was carrying wine cases in dad would kind of peek around the corner and get curious and nosy what he was doing. And my grandfather would say, you know, invite him to come help organize the bottles in the closet. And my grandfather would open up a bottle of wine for lunch and drink half for lunch and half for dinner. And my dad was the only kid that would beg for it not to be watered down. There was something about family and the palate and just the whole experience of wine really piqued his interest.
They found this property. Daniel had very specific specifications for what he wanted for vineyard property. Number one thing was calcareous clay soil like in Bordeaux. And he found this property, which was not for sale at that time. He called George. They had been looking in Napa and Sonoma and Argentina, in Bordeaux, because at that time you could buy into the French land before you couldn't. He said, I found it, it's in Paso. And George said, where is that, in Texas? But
And then he found out it was close to Pebble Beach, so he
was fine.
totally
He
fine.
was fine. But Daniel, looking for that very specific calcareous clay soil, he found it here on this mountain. And his instincts about this place were confirmed when, you know, drum roll for any wine geeks out here today, he realized after researching this property that it had a lot of historical significance. In the late 60s and early 70s, this property was called Hoffman Mountain Ranch Vineyards. It was owned by a man named Dr. Stanley Hoffman, who was a cardiologist in Beverly Hills, and he had hired the premier winemaking consultant at the time to look all around and find the very best place to plant wine in the Central Coast. And that enologist was Andrei Chelychev, who's now considered the father of American winemaking. He was a Russian enologist who at that very same moment in history was working with Robert Mondavi and Warren Winiarski and all the people that have really laid the groundwork to recreate Napa and make it into the great wine growing region that it is. At that very same moment in time, he stood here on this mountain and said, this is it.
It was the McGilvery Ranch before it became Halter Ranch. And the McGilvery family were grain farmers. So all the land that is now planted to vine was previously planted to grains, mostly safflower, wheat, and barley. So if you notice the silos down below and the silo barn, those are all from when they had the working granary here. When we get in the cars, we're going to be driving down that paved road, which is an old airstrip. So that was a landing strip installed by the McGilvery family, I believe in the 60s. And so the barn there on the right-hand side is where their airplane hangar used to be, yep. And then we built that beautiful wood facade over the top, and that was our winery prior to opening up this gorgeous gravity flow facility.
As Carly mentioned, so our owner is Hans-Jörg Wies. He's a Swiss man, and he bought the property in 2000. And really, it started as a grower's vineyard. So we kind of call ourselves like we were more of like a farmer's market for local winemakers. As Carly mentioned, you know, we were making wine out of a small airplane hangar. There's 2 airplane hangars down there. The one on the right was the old barrel room. The one on the left was the winery. In 2011 was when this winery was built. That's when I came over here, as well as Kevin, our head winemaker. We both came from Justin Winery, and we kind of created like Halter 2.0. So the tasting room used to be down in a small building behind the Victorian. I think it's been about 3.5 years now that we moved up into this tasting room here. Only 281 acres are part of what we call our vineyard footprint. And even within that vineyard footprint, not all of that is producing. So some of the land is fallow that we've ripped out, that we're gonna plan to replant. And then some of it is just new plantings. You'll see a lot of grow tubes, so they're not quite producing yet. But as Carly did mention, we're SIP certified here, so that stands for Sustainability in Practice. So the whole vineyard is certified sustainable. And we'll kind of talk about some of those practices as we move throughout the property. So we employ those practices in the vineyard and the winery as well. And as far as fruit goes, we're pretty much split between Bordeaux and Rhone varietals, and then we have a bunch of random little things thrown in there as well.
So what got you into distilling?
I don't know. I think my partner and I were like, you know, we were both. He had a winery about as long as I had a winery, so I don't know. I think we were just really looking for, you know, something to be unique, you know, and get into something different. And honestly, it was just going to distill it first, and then it ended up being a whole nother adventure because we just didn't realize how, at the time, which was almost 10 years ago when we first started thinking about it, it has just taken off since then, you know, and,
Sure.
and in a way that's not, it's an organic way of doing it, because now first it was, you know, maybe it was the small brewer, but you know, it was a brewer mentality of like, you know, hey, we want to have spirits, but it's had its own life cycle now already.
Look at the different mixers. Okay, so you see the fennel seed. These are all notes that are going to come into it. Snowberry, sweet orange, white oak, white pepper. We were just talking about white pepper as being something that's really big.
We're just trying to achieve a healthier environment where we can sustain